It's the 40th anniversary of the Islamic Revolution. We are meeting with Shirin Ebadi, first Iranian woman recipient of the Nobel Prize, but it's also the first Muslim woman to be awarded this prize for the defense of human rights, defense of women and children in Iran. Iran, she left. She's in exile because she had only two possibilities then. Either remain on location in Iran with the risk of being silenced or even being jailed, and other possibility, leave the country to carry on denouncing the abuses in Iran. Thank you, Mrs. Ebadi, for being here with us, with France 24, during the High Festival of Carthagene, Festival of Indias, and on the occasion of the 40th anniversary of the revolution in Iran. According to what I read about you, it seems that you took part in this revolution. You supported it. So what went through the minds of the people so that people like you would support the revolution in Tehran?
At the time, Khomenei's slogans and the other revolutionaries were independence and liberty. Actually, they promised that in the Islamic Republic we would reach those goals. And now, 40 years later, I'm disappointed that we did not obtain the liberty we wanted, and nor did we get independence. Before, Iran was walking in the footsteps of the United States of America, and today, instead of the USA, it's Russia. So we've lost our independence, in fact, and we did not obtain what we wanted.
During those months or days following the victory of the revolution, that at the end of the day was an Islamic revolution, which was not the aim at the beginning, when did you set yourself that things will not carry on the way you expected?
Before Khomeini came back to Iran, he was convinced that everyone would be free, that women's rights were important, and that even the communists could participate in this new republic. But once the Ayatollah arrived in Iran, things were completely different compared to what had been announced beforehand. And after a very short period of time after the revolution, Khomeini stated, women who must work in the administration must absolutely wear the hijab. And that was the first day when I realized that all of those promises were just lies. And starting from then, I began to move away from the policy of the Islamic Republic. It was March 8th, 1979.
We're talking about the outcome of the Islamic Revolution and the outcome of this experience that was, in fact, a part of the religious society, male society for most of it, imposed models to the whole society, all through the country. So what are the negative outcomes? I mean, we know what they are. Were there positive effects of this Islamic revolution that you could allude to?
They didn't agree with women's freedoms, and we all know that, of course. But the result of the revolution led to the fact that the universities became Islamic universities, and therefore you no longer had the old-fashioned paternalist system which prevented women from going to the university. And therefore, there was no longer that pretext to prevent women from going to the university so they could go and study. Under the Shah, in the best of circumstances, in Iranian universities, there were only 25% of women, whereas today there's more than 50%. So that is a positive consequence of the revolution in Iran. And because of that, in spite of everything, the revolutionaries no longer had control as much as they thought they would. And because of that, there are more women in traditional families who were able to go to the university. And this meant that there was a transformation and many activist feminists.
This movement triggered a very large social change, not linked to religion, coming from women and from families, from the social knit. And this changed Iran during the past 40 years. You can be glad of it or not, but the country is not looking like it was 40 years ago.
Yes, that's quite correct. And the result of women going to the university and the awakening of women was such that they stood back from the government. In 1979, more than 90% of Iranian people were in favor of the Islamic Revolution. But today, if you were to organize a new referendum, a free referendum with international monitoring, it's quite clear that you would only obtain 10% at most who would vote in favor of the Islamic Revolution. Amongst those people, you have people who have close interests in the Islamic Revolution.
You were a judge in 1979. You were, in fact, the first woman to be appointed by the judiciary in Iran. Then, the revolution, you're being put aside, you're being assigned an expert role, and finally you step down. I think you're a good example, an iconic example of one of the most important aspects of the Iranian situation, justice, namely, and the rights of women in this country. Let's start with the judiciary. The Iranian society says that the judiciary is one of the most important issues of the Islamic Revolution in order to progress.
Unfortunately, the judiciary system in Iran is rife with difficulties, one of the most important being that the institution is no longer independent. And when you have political convictions, it's not the judge who determines the sentence, but rather the members of the security forces of the regime who basically give instructions to the prosecutor. And I myself have met with many lawyers who've experienced that, and once you receive the security forces report, they recommended a 10-year sentence, for example, and once you go to court, even though the case and the deliberations that we had, in fact, you discovered that in the end it's a 10-year sentence that was mentioned in the report ahead of time. So the fact that the judiciary is not independent really does considerable damage to the functioning of the system in Iran. And there's also a lot of administrative corruption within the judiciary.
I wanted to talk about a certain amount of initiatives that were made in the time you were in Iran. The 1 million signatures for a petition and other campaigns to educate women for them to know better their rights. Then you had to exile yourself, and a certain amount of your colleagues were jailed. And I think this struggle of activists like you had became a major threat for the Islamic Republic. Why women?
As you said, the Iranian government doesn't respect women, and in particular is not favorable to women's rights. There's a system of segregation within the Islamic Republic. They are convinced that rights must be defined in terms of Islamic law, and if women do not agree, they consider that women are against the ideology of the regime. I should add that after the independence, Islam can be seen from different angles. You can be a Muslim woman and nonetheless draft good laws. There are many people who think that that's the case, but since they're not in power, the government just doesn't listen. So women are always considered as being people against the regime and the enemy.
It's complicated to lead this activism with the pressure of the United States currently.
I'd like to ask a question to the Iranian government. Why is it that we're providing weapons to Yemen? Why is it that we're providing weapons and money to help Bashar al-Assad so that he's able to kill his own people? Why is it that we've been subsidizing for more than 30 years now Hezbollah in Lebanon, whereas our own people needs that money? So it is those policies that are a problem for us. If the Iranian government were to change its foreign policy, it would be in the interest of the people, first and foremost, but also the government would be able to get out of the problem of the sanctions. The sanctions would be lifted. And even though I'm against these sanctions, and I believe that the American government is responsible, of course, but the Iranian government also bears some responsibility, and day after day, our people are poorer and poorer. The Iranian government and the Maduro government in Venezuela, in order to justify the miserable circumstances of their countries, are claiming to be the enemy of the United States, and we don't agree with the United States. Okay, fine, you can be the enemy of the United States. I'm also against U.S. policy. But to be the enemy of the USA does not mean looting our own national resources. Being the enemy of the USA doesn't mean having bad Iranian politics.
Mrs. Shirin Ebadi, thank you for talking to us on France 24, and thank you for watching us. You can watch again this interview on the internet on france24.com. Thank you.